Great. Well, again, thank you everyone for and for the organizers for inviting me and for having landscapes 1,000 landscapes for 1 billion people here with you. It's really a pleasure and a great opportunity to share our work. So next slide, please. I'll begin by providing just a brief overview of what 1,000 Landscapes for 1 Billion People initiative is. And then I will talk a little bit about our capacity strengthening design team, who has created the tool that I'm going to emphasize today. And then I'll outline briefly what our ILM practical guide and tools guide is. And before I start focusing on our tool that we call the history of experience with ILM. And then I'll mention how we tested the tool and lessons we've learned from that testing and how we're adapting and rolling out the tool. And leave a little bit of time for questions. Next slide, please. So 1,000 Landscapes for 1 Billion People is what we call a radical collaboration of 6 core partners, includes Eco-Agriculture Partners, Rainforest Alliance, Common Land Conservation International, Tech Matters, and UNDP. And we share a vision to scale the practice of integrated landscape management through strengthening capacity, helping create enabling environments, and catalyzing systems change. And we collaborate with technical partners and with local landscape partners to co-design and test our tools and services. Currently, we have 28 active technical partners. Landscapes for Our Future is one of them. And we're co-designing with 23 landscape partnerships at the moment. Next slide, please. So 1,000 Landscapes, or we call it 1,000L for short, views integrated landscape management and as an adaptive, collaborative, iterative process to help stakeholders achieve transformational change in their landscapes. And the process is comprised of 5 elements, which overlap nicely with the process that was outlined earlier in this session. We have landscape partnership formation, shared understanding about the landscape, vision and planning for the future of the landscape, taking action to implement plans and realize visions, and then learning from our experience and assessing impact. Next slide, please. So the capacity strengthening design team of 1,000L, which I lead, aims to help mainstream the practice of ILM through an ascending process that defines our team's 5 main work streams. And so these include developing a profile of the landscape and a history of the landscape's experience with ILM or ILM-like activities, a capacity assessment protocol, collections of tools and guidance documents that support the practice of ILM, developing learning modules that we use as the foundation for our capacity assessment activities, and then learning program delivery. So we're working on all 5 of those, both originally sequentially, and now we're working on them simultaneously because we have all 5 work streams well into action phase. And our approach to doing the capacity strengthening design, developing tools and services, is to co-design with landscape partnerships. That's fundamental. And also to develop an adaptive learning process so that we can have relatively general or generalizable learning tools, but that we can also, have them be context specific for all the different landscape situations. Next slide, please. So the collection of tools and guidance documents that the design team has produced to help landscape partnerships build capacity from within are contained in these 2 key documents. One we call the Practical Guide to Integrated Landscape Management. And this provides a framework that corresponds with the 5 elements of the adaptive collaborative management cycle. And within each of the 5 elements, there are 3 to 4 action steps and outputs associated with each. And the corresponding tool guide describes tools that can support each step of the collaborative process. So these two sets of materials were compiled through lots of deliberation internally and a lot of collaboration with the partners that I've mentioned. And these are versions 1 of each of them, and we're about to begin developing version 2. They're meant to be dynamic documents, and we recognize that tools to support ILM are constantly evolving. Witness this learning session that we're having here. And so we will, of course, welcome any additions that you can help us identify. And we have links to the tools in this presentation into these 2 guides. Next slide, please. So the particular tool that our design team began work on early in our formation, we call the History of ILM, or ILM History Tool. And it's meant to help landscape partnerships define and understand their experience with ILM or ILM-like practices. So we, don't assume that that ILM is, codified or understood in local landscapes, but we recognize that there's a lot of familiarity that landscapes have, with these types of processes. And so we want to give them a chance to explain them and describe them, and see how that they map on to our ILM framework that I mentioned earlier. So the tool brings groups of stakeholders together in the landscape to reflect on their experience. And it helps them recognize what the sort of areas of strength, where their experience has been strong, and maybe areas of weakness as well. It's not meant to measure them quantitatively, but it is meant to give them a sense for where they have some competencies already and where they may be lacking. And it also prepares them to conduct our capacity assessment, which is another tool we've developed. I won't take time to share that today, but it is more quantitative and it actually evaluates and scores competencies. Next slide, please. So in order to validate this tool, we tested it with the 5 landscape partnerships that you see listed here, 2 in Kenya, 1 in Spain, 1 in Colombia, 1 in Namibia. These all represent, our local landscape partners. And, we did the testing by interviewing pairs or small groups of landscape partnership leaders and facilitators. And we discussed, how easy or how difficult was it to use the tool, their experience with what it was like to try to implement the tool. And then we discussed with them the value of the experience and the findings. And so we have a picture here of one of our landscape partnerships actually implementing the tool. The tool is meant to bring people together in groups so that it becomes a reflection exercise on what kind of experience they have so far with ILM. And it takes about some landscape partnerships did it in a day. Most of them gave it a day, and then they recognized that they were getting so much out of it and that they wanted to delve in deeper. So they said, well, can we take longer with it? And we said, sure, take the time you think you need. And so some of them went on for 3 or 4 days, parts of 3 or 4 days, so that they would have adequate time to reflect on it and really gain what they thought they could from the experience. Next slide, please. So feedback that we got from the landscape partnerships that we synthesized from the 5 that I just mentioned, that the framework organically guides and anchors discussion about their landscape experience, that the tool promotes rewarding multi-stakeholder discovery process and learning experience, that it validates the relevance of their own diverse experience with ILM-like practice. And one reason this is so important to us is we we don't want to be in the role of having to sell ILM. We want to validate the fact that most landscape partnerships or small groups that think they want to become a landscape partnership have some experience with the ILM sorts of processes. And this tool definitely did that. It fosters shared understanding about the landscape through these reflection sections, and it discovers challenges, strengths, and priority needs in ILM. Findings lay the foundation for evaluating landscape partner competencies. And as I mentioned, we do that through our capacity assessment tool, which follows the ILM history tool. So we, in helping ourselves, our own team, figure out how to make the tool more interesting and easier for people to use, we recognize through the tool testing process that we need to make facilitation guides that guide the use of the tool very simple. Our first iterations of them were too jargony. They didn't like that, so they gave us some tips on how to avoid jargon. They all recommended that sharing the outputs of these exercises across landscape partnerships widely would really amplify their value, because part of the value is in recognizing the diversity of history with ILM and how much can be gained from sharing those, which of course is part of the design of 1,000 landscapes for 1 billion people. So that fit our own concept pretty well. And they also recommended, many of those groups had already tried the capacity assessment tool. They appreciated the fact that they were both built around the same framework, but they also felt that it became a little bit repetitive. So let's go to the next slide, please. So we're, in terms of applying and adapting and rolling out the tool qualitatively benchmarks landscape partnerships' state of experience with ILM. And so repeating it could provide insightful and motivational progress updates for the landscape itself, and also as it shares its experience with other landscapes. But this question about overlapping with the capacity assessment tool has actually stimulated our design team's efforts now to integrate the two, so that the history of experience with ILM and capacity assessment are not necessarily going to be two distinct tools anymore. We're looking at ways to help guide landscape partnerships through this internal reflection and assessment process without maybe having to do it multiple times in the same setting. Landscape partnerships are looking for easy access to the tool. And so that has prompted us to digitize the tool with one of our other design teams that we call Tarasso. Tarasso design team is in the business and within 1,000L of digitizing tools and services. So on our agenda coming up in the next quarter is to actually get this designed integrated tool up onto the Tarasso digital platform. Next slide, please. So if you're interested in more information about this tool and the capacity assessment tool, we're happy to share it. Landscapes.global gives information about not only the capacity strengthening design team, but our various other design teams that are also developing a whole range of tools and services. I've identified Tarasso here, since that'll be the place to go to look for this tool in digital format. And there's also a link to the ILM history tool itself. So thank you very much, and look forward to discussion and questions.